What is going on, everybody? And welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And most importantly, it's time to put the pressure on some teams that need to wake up and answer the bell in the offseason and still make a move to make sure that next season they're in good shape. There's lots to talk about, including fantasy relevancy across the league. Happy Friday, everybody. Let's tap in.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fantasy heads, the time is almost here. The official countdown to draft season is about to be on. Welcome back to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Mr. Steele Roden and your boy Big Flip Livingstone. And as I mentioned off the top of the show, people, we are going to continue to feed you everything you need from a fantasy perspective. Even though the NHL is quietening down, Steele and I are ramping our efforts up because it is almost money season, baby. And on today's episode, we're taking a look at some teams that have been a little too quiet this offseason with a couple of players that they may need to insert into their lineup to save what could have been a really bad offseason for some of these teams. Steele, a little signing from the New York Rangers. We're going to get to that later in the show. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows this is the last episode of July, and Steele and I are fired up for August, which will be a full kickoff 60-day countdown into fantasy draft season, people. So stay tuned for that. Steele, let's have a look at these three teams.
Yes,
three
sir.
teams that we think could have done a little bit more this offseason and really might still need to make a move or two to really kind of bolster their lineup to a way that we think they need to. So why don't you hit me with one of the teams you're looking at? We're both looking at three, so let's kick this show off in style, my friend.
Yeah, there's three teams that came right to mind for me. And the first one, and you and I have talked about this, so I know you're probably going to be talking about them for this episode as well. But it's the New York Islanders. They made absolutely zero moves so far in the offseason, obviously linked to Johnny Gaudreau. And I don't know what Lou Lamoriello is thinking or what he's doing, but he didn't do enough and he didn't do anything. So a swing and a miss for the New York Islanders. And this is one of the teams that really need to make a splash in the next month or so, or even in the next couple of weeks, with guys who are still available, who are the top dogs, as free agents right now. But you and I have talked about them before. They're a good team, but they just can't score goals, and that's what's really hurt them last season. 9th worst team in the league in goals for last season. 2 guys on their team scored more than 20 goals, and that's just very, very sad. One of them being Brock Nelson, who was the leading goal scorer for the New York Islanders, goal scorer, and led the team in points. And I'm sorry, and this is no shot at, I'm not taking a shot at Brock Nelson, but if he's the leading goal scorer and point scorer for your team, that's a big problem right there. So for me, scoring, he's only gotten past 26 goals in his career before. He just had a career high in goals. He just had a career high in points. He's 30 years old. For me, that's a problem. The first line consists of Brock Nelson, Kyle Palmieri, and Anthony Beauvillier. That's a problem right there. They need someone who's going to help facilitate up front, be a playmaker, and can help their team score some more goals. Yeah. And for me, that's Nazem Kadri, who's probably the top free agent right now. That's who I'm looking at. And that's the team for me that really needs to make a splash in the offseason.
And we know Nazem Kadri is most definitely that name out there. We don't need to double circle that or mention it again. But they do need some offensive support up front. And I know that Matthew Barzal, Brock Nelson, even Pajot as a third-line center, I don't hate what they have going on up the middle.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. It's not great, because I do absolutely love the blue. They added Alexander Romanov in the offseason. That was really their one move. So Noah Dobson, Alexander Romanov, Adam Pelech, Ryan Pulock, that's a pretty solid back end, especially when you have Sorokin. So what I could see the Islanders doing if they don't get Kadri, because I'm with you, I think that really is a guy that could push the pace a little bit up front and add a dimension to their offensive game that they currently do not have.
Yes.
But if they strike out on that, I could see them going like the bargain bin type option and even adding in a couple of veterans. They're already quite veteran-laden up front. But a guy like Phil Kessel coming off 52 points with the right mix of players, that's 52 points last season on the Coyotes. I think Phil has some left in the tank. We haven't talked about Kessel at all. He could fit in nicely in that bottom six in New York, mixing it up with the likes of Oliver Wahlstrom, Anders Lee, even. Let's see what happens. That's a name that I wanted to throw out there because he's not the guy that you mentioned, facilitating, changing the play. But he
quick shifts for Phil.
Yeah, quick shifts for Phil for sure. Not too much facilitation, but he can still put the puck on the stick and he can still feed a tight pass tape to tape. So I think the New York Islanders definitely need to be taking a look around at some of these options because sure, Nazem Kadri is definitely that top tier one, but there are a couple of other names out there. Even an Evan Rodrigues could work in New York.
Yeah.
I could see that happening. I'm going to keep talking about a couple of these top UFAs that are still out there that I think could slot in on some of these teams, Steele. And let me just quickly mention my team because we're keeping today's episode super short. I'm going to quickly say that the left side in Vegas leaves a lot to be desired. I don't know what's happening in Vegas this offseason as well. But other than Jonathan Marchessault, I don't like what they have in terms of left wingers. Will Carrier, Chandler Stevenson. I know he had a good year. But I say they take a shot on a guy like Sonny Milano. What are you saying?
No, I think you're completely off right now. I think they could take a shot at Sonny Milano. I think there's no problem with that. That's not like a huge splash or anything, but they just traded for Jack Eichel. They had so much cap space problems. They had to get rid of Max Pacioretty for future considerations. Like,
that's why I think adding in some fresh blood into this lineup that down the stretch last year was clearly asleep. The Eichel move so far has not worked out. They need to do something, Steele. And if it has to shake it up and bring in a little bit of young blood and some good talent in Milano, I think we can both agree that the left side in Vegas is not good, especially when you take a look at the back end and how good that is. So I'm just looking at the Vegas Golden Knights after the stretch run that they had last season. They need to wake up and do something different because Eichel wasn't getting it done. That was for sure. So maybe a full season, though, in Vegas, proper offseason, proper start to the season. Maybe that's one of those guys in Eichel just thinking that you could get at maybe a bit of a cheaper price because of his last season. Could be a big one in store for Jack Eichel.
Yeah, I think there's a big season ahead for Jack Eichel. I like the Sonny Milano, highlighting him as well. He's a 26-year-old guy who just came off a 34-point season, a very skilled forward as well. So definitely need some help on the left side, but it's the Vegas Golden Knights. They had some cap space issues. They had to make some changes to their lineup. I think they're going to be a good team next year with Jack Eichel, who's going to be fully healthy, hopefully fully healthy. But there's a lot of other teams I've got in mind. And, actually, I'll throw it back over to you to head into the break.
Appreciate that, Steele. And look, Mark Stone being healthy again, that's obviously going to be a difference maker in Vegas. So, hey, we're going to have all of our eyes on these players. That is for sure. And you need to have your eye on Built Bar. And if you haven't tried the Built Bar Puffs yet, which Steele and I just have, my goodness, it is delicious. It's indulgent. It's cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture. Real cookie dough chunks. And of course, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. That's Steele's favorite. And it's like all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of all the doo-doo nutrients. It is healthy for you. 160 calories and only 15 grams of fat. And that's not even fat. It's protein. It's delicious. And it is nutritious. If you're going to try a new flavor of Built, make sure it is the cookie dough chunk puff. And whenever you need a snack for a workout, a late night treat, or you just need a quick bite like me, Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste way better than a candy bar. Ditch the calories, fat, and sugar. Grab yourself a Built bar. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order.
Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Don't forget, we are free and available on all podcast platforms, which also includes YouTube. So make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Let's continue, Flip, with the topic of discussion right now. Teams that need to make an offseason splash, who have yet to, really make anything at all so far in the summer. I wanted to talk about the Vancouver Canucks. I think I'm going to talk about them for a little bit. I think they're in a very difficult situation from my point of view. They have no cap space whatsoever. Absolutely zero cap space to work with. They have a backup goaltender who's only played 9 games in the NHL. The defensive core that consists of Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who's making $7.2 million right now, which is just an absolute horrendous contract for the Vancouver Canucks. Their D-core also consists of Luke Shen and Travis Dermott, who, I absolutely hate. And for me, their bottom 6, nothing to love about their bottom 6. So I think Vancouver Canucks, I want to talk about them, but they have no cap space. But the team I'm actually going to talk about is the Winnipeg Jets. And I'm going to keep this real short. Another team that hasn't really made any other moves besides that qualifying offer to Pierre-Luc Dubois. They signed Rick Bowness as their head coach. I love that. I love that heading forward. They have $8.5 million in cap space, so they have the room to potentially add an additional offensive weapon. And for me, it really did, halfway through the season, obviously with Paul Maurice stepping down, saying that they needed a new voice in the room. Mark Scheifele comes out after the season ends, and he says he really wants to know where this team is heading in the future before he, makes any signs any contracts or makes any deals with the team. For the Winnipeg Jets, if you have to move a guy like Nikolai Ehlers, Blake Wheeler, even Mark Scheifele or Dubois, I think the whole entire team could be up on the trade block except for Kyle Connor. They really need help on the blue line, in my opinion. I think they need some help in the bottom 6. That's a team I think that really needs to make a splash in this offseason.
Yeah, is Jack Johnson something they look at? Anton Strawman, Calvin DeHaan is left out there. There's not a lot of good options on the blue line, unfortunately, even though I tend to agree with you. Yeah, Klingberg, I guess. We're going to continue to throw those names out. Him and Nas are really, Klingberg and Nas are really the two targets fantasy-wise that really do hold a ton of value in terms of just their name. So we'll see where they go. But the thing that you brought up with Winnipeg, Steele, that makes me nervous about taking players from this team next year on my fantasy squad is when you look at a team and they have issues, most of the time you can put your finger on it. Goaltending, scoring, whatever, leadership, defense. Why does it feel like it's a little bit of everything in Winnipeg? And we knew something wasn't exactly right there last season. So I'm very nervous in general if I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan, just from like an overall standpoint. But I'm with you. The up and down the lineup, and I would throw in Connor Hellebuck as that other name who's just not moving anywhere because he had a pretty good season last year.
Yeah, thank you for that.
At times he was better than others. But I'm with you. That team is just, we're talking about teams that need to make a little offseason splash. They need to have a splash of water on the face, I think, and wake up a little bit because, just from an overall fantasy perspective, I'd be staying away from a lot of Winnipeg Jets next season.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think you can still find some guys, obviously, like, we talked about Dubois, who's going to be, who's not at the superstar level, but he's still a star in the league. He's just coming off a 60-point season. Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele still putting up a significant amount of
Blake Wheeler's
points.
Still valuable.
There's still some valuable pieces and players to that team, but definitely some players that I would tend to wait a little longer in the draft to see if they fall a little bit, and then pick the poison right there and pick them up when I can pick them up.
Yeah, most definitely. And, the UFA situation obviously got picked down very quickly, and now we're talking about some names, and I've thrown a couple out there in Evan Rodrigues and Phil Kessel that aren't exactly the sexy ones. But with the right team to sign somebody, someone's going to sign Sonny Milano. Someone is going to likely sign Evan Rodrigues. Someone is going to sign these guys, and you have to keep your eye on them because – we've talked about them last year, 30, 40-point players. But in the right spot, they bump up to 50 or 60 points, and you've missed out on them. You're not doing your job as a fantasy gem, and you're probably not subscribed to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, which is a good idea, by the way, that you can head out and do that right now.
Yeah, make sure you're definitely subscribing and following the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. And thank you for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. And Flip, I'll throw it over to you. What is
Please.
your second or third team that you're looking at right now?
Yeah, you know, we each had the Islanders. I also had the Knights, which you weren't so sure about because of cap space. But cap space can be circumvented for the right moves, and that left side needs to be addressed in Vegas. Bottom line, so we'll see what happens. But my last team is the Boston Bruins, who have been quite quiet as well. And our good friend over on the Locked On Bruins, Mr. Ian McLaren, had been raving all the end of last season, all through the trade deadline, about how the Boston Bruins needed to address center depth from the second line down. Yeah. And I don't know if Pavel Zacha, swapping Eric Haula for Pavel Zacha, is addressing your center issues. But at a quick look at the list, Steele, wouldn't Paul Stastny fit in nicely on that third line in Boston? He seems like a very Bruins-esque player. Also, hold the phone. In 71 games last year, he still had 21 goals and 24 assists. Valuable fantasy asset in deeper formats. And to me, Steele, and I'll throw it back over for you on your take on this. This guy, you know, at 36 years old, you know, red flag for fantasy for sure, he logged almost 18 minutes of ice time last year. You know, put up good numbers, gets shots on goal, and gets in there on the defensive side of things. So let me know what you think about that take, because I could see the Boston Bruins taking a risk on Paul Stastny. They need some center help in a big way. Jack Studnicka is going to be the third line center this year. I don't know about that. Thomas Nosek? No, sir.
Yeah, I don't like that either. You know, I don't hate the team right now for the Boston Bruins. I think they're in some trouble with, you know, obviously David Pastrnak and their GM Don Sweeney.
Yeah.
You know, towards the end of last year, you and I started really highlighting that third line of Charlie of Smith and
Coyle.
Coyle. Thank you very much for reeling me back in there. But I really started liking that line for fantasy as well.
Yep.
Towards the end of the season, they really started helping out the top two lines, picking up the productivity. And I wouldn't hate Paul Stastny to the Bruins as well. I think that would be a great fit for the third or fourth line, a guy who can still be aggressive in the offensive zone. He's great at faceoffs. I think he could really help this team. I know the Bruins were talking about, we're maybe thinking about negotiating and getting David Krejci back to the Boston Bruins as well. So that's a potential player who could be making a return. But I actually really like that you mentioned Paul Stastny, maybe potentially joining the Boston Bruins and helping that center depth.
Yeah, it seems like a very Boston Bruins-esque move. And you mentioned the faceoff dot, which is something that the Boston Bruins have done very well over the last handful of seasons, is very good possession metrics. We know that Patrice Bergeron is just an absolute beast in the dot as well. And it's one of the reasons why they've had success, is they have those kinds of pieces up the middle. So I don't think they're going to head into the season, you know, with Jack Studnicka and Pavel Zacha as their second and third options. And I know Studnicka had a very, very exciting come up through the minors. He's still a decent prospect. Maybe he takes a step forward this season. But if I'm the Boston Bruins and I'm taking a look around at some of the center depth in the Atlantic Division alone, don't even talk about the Metro Division full of killers, I would be concerned about the guns that I have in my holsters when I'm going up against some of those other squads, Steele.
Yeah, and especially with the Atlantic Division getting a lot tougher now with all the moves the Red Wings, the Senators have made over the last couple of weeks. It's going to be a scary division. So they got to up their game as well. They got to be prepared for a tough battle for a wild card spot or even just a playoff spot next season. I'm actually going to head out west for my last team, and I want to talk about the Seattle Kraken. Obviously, one of the the newest newest franchise to the NHL. Obviously going a different route than what the Vegas Golden Knights did, but I think this upcoming season there is a lot of upside to this team. Okay. They only have $2.1 million in cap space. I still think they need to make a bigger splash so far, but I really like this team right now. Jared McCann, trading for Oliver Bjorkstrand, Jordan Eberle, Jaden Schwartz, Wenberg, those three guys who found some chemistry last year. You know I'm a huge fan of Jared McCann. They have some young studs now in Ben Years, Geeky, and Wright. Grubauer, their starting goaltender. They've got Martin Jones as a backup, who they just signed to a 1-year, $2 million deal. Obviously, with Chris Drieger out for 8 to 9, or at this point 6 to 7 months, I believe it is now. But I really do like the pieces. You talked about their blue line. Maybe Klingberg reuniting with Alexiak as well. I like their pieces. For me, it's a lot of depth pieces, though. Their top two lines are guys who I would have as second or third liners right now.
Yeah.
I think they're needing to look for a superstar guy who can really elevate their teammates right now, because their guys, their top 6 forward guys, those guys are going to put up 40 to 50 points a season. They're very consistent with that, but they need a superstar player who's going to elevate their teammates around them, but also put up 70 to 80, even maybe 90 points in a season. And that's something I really think the Seattle Kraken need to look out for. They got $2.1 million in cap space. They have a ton of guys right now who are signed for $5 million on 4 or 5 year deals. I think they can make a trade, maybe, I don't know, work some magic around and land a superstar, because they could really use it right now. And if they can land a superstar, in my opinion, they become a very, very good team.
I like this take. And also what leads me to believe that it could happen is not only the pieces you mentioned, also Shane Wright now in that mix as well.
Yeah.
Do not sleep on Geekie, because I really like Morgan Geekie's game, and I know he's, projected bottom sixer.
Yeah, he's a fourth line center right now.
Yeah, that could change. With the right progression. And I'll say this. The Seattle Kraken have 9 draft picks over the next 2 seasons in the first 3 rounds.
Yep.
That, combined with a little bit of cap space, combined with some good young prospects, maybe you get in more of a veteran player. So that's the kind of mix that you need to make an offseason splash. A team that has not made one yet. We've highlighted a bunch of them that we think still might and should. Also, Steele, I'll say it again. Some of these splashes happen. You got to keep your eye on the names that move and on the names around these players, because fresh blood in new places, we talked about it yesterday, that can be huge heading into a new season for players that did not, and teams that did not have a good year last year. So all I need to say is both Steele and I are beyond fired up for the next 2 months of content, because this is where we both butter our bread and stack the paper. So please head out there and subscribe. Fresh episodes every single day in the lead up to the draft. And I'm excited to say we will be in the lab cooking up all kinds of delicious content.
Look, I'm super psyched and super hyped for this upcoming hockey season. Super hyped to get back into the gambling portion of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. Bets of the night, locks of the night. We're going to be posting all of that, obviously, every single day once the season starts. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast your first listen every single day. But for your second listen, you have to go check out Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, just like this one right here. So make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. And once you do subscribe, you'll get all the latest episodes Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. You don't want to miss out on all the content coming out in August. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there. And we shall see you back here again on Monday.
Peace.